HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Doctor's Blackwell, How Two Pioneering Sisters Brought Medicine to Women and Women to Medicine, by Janice P. Nimura. Read by Laural Merlington. Prologue. On May 14, 2018, a cheerful crowd of activist New Yorkers blocked the sidewalk at the corner of Bleecker and Crosby Streets. Before them stood an elderly and unremarkable building. 4 stories topped by a pair of attic dormers, battered brick facade obscured by a fire escape, pre-hipster neighborhood bar on the ground floor. After a parade of speakers, all but one of them women, the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation unveiled a commemorative plaque, the newest stop on its civil rights and social justice map. In this building, it read, the first female doctor in America, Elizabeth Blackwell, established the first hospital for, staffed, and run by women. Applause erupted. VIPs grinned. Cameras clicked. There was a triumphant sense of reclaiming a hero, of restoring a story of female agency, of lifting, for just a moment, the grim political mood. Someone was selling eye-popping T-shirts, black and hot pink on white, Elizabeth Blackwell, OGMD. The celebrants dispersed into the balmy evening, imagining the first female doctor, saintly and sepia-toned, bending solicitously over her grateful patients. Or maybe a fiercer version, original gangster of medical women, crusading feminist. Both images were satisfying. Neither was accurate. On May 12, 1857, in a room overlooking that same corner of Bleecker and Crosby, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, petite, unsmiling, soberly dressed, moved into the light slanting through tall sash windows to address a small audience of ladies and a sprinkling of gentlemen. 2 rows of iron bedsteads filled the space, made up with mismatched but carefully smoothed white linens. The assembled guests had settled themselves with a waggish chuckle or two about the impropriety of mixed company gathering in a room that was, strictly speaking, a lady's bedchamber. It would never be so pristine again, but for now, stethoscopes and scalpels, opium and mercury, blood and piss and all the unmentionable mess of illness and childbirth and surgery and death were nowhere to be seen. Elizabeth cleared her throat to be heard over the hoofbeats and clatter of busy Broadway, a short block away, and read with stiff gravity from the document she held. This institution, which is publicly opened today, is a hospital and dispensary for poor women and children. Its unprecedented purpose, she read on, was threefold: to allow women to consult doctors of their own sex, free of charge, to provide the growing number of female medical students with the practical experience denied them by established hospitals, and to train nurses. Her tone was level and businesslike, betraying no sense that for most of New York's burghers, not to mention their wives, the idea of a woman doctor was outrageous. She did not mention the loneliness, drudgery, and pain she had transcended to become the first woman in America to receive a medical degree in 1849. Nor did she acknowledge the taller, equally grave woman by her side, who shared her direct gaze and determined jawline. Her sister Emily, who had struggled just as mightily to earn her own degree in 1854, and without whom this moment might not have arrived. The trustees of the newborn New York Infirmary for Indigent Women and Children, 13 men and 4 women, had rejected the suggestion that one of these female physicians should tell her own story that day, fearing she might sound off-puttingly like an agitator for women's rights. But Elizabeth was not a radical, however radical her choice to study medicine might seem. The full, thorough education of women in medicine is a new idea, and like all other truths, requires time to prove its value. She continued, women must show to medical men, even more than to the public, their capacity to act as physicians, their earnestness as students of medicine, before the existing institutions with their great advantages of practice and complete organization will be open to them. Then she ceded the floor to a man. Henry Ward Beecher, the heavy-lidded, silver-tongued, irrepressibly libidinous pastor of Brooklyn's Plymouth Church, arguably the most famous man in New York. There are none less able to make provision for themselves in this world than women and children. Beecher intoned, and then, with more brio than coherence, insisted that he believed most thoroughly in woman's accomplishments. Indeed, women might well be better suited to medicine than men. Her intuition, perception, and good mother wit render her so, he explained, surrendering to stereotype and dispensing with science altogether. The tread of woman in the sick chamber is itself antidote. Their expressions neutral, the Blackwell sisters applauded with the rest, allowing this patronizing, magnetic man, whom they had known, in fact, long before his fame took hold, to proclaim that woman was ordained to be a doctor, was the best publicity imaginable. A dozen years earlier, at the age of 24, Elizabeth Blackwell had selected medicine as a means of proving a truth she believed to be divinely sanctioned, that women could be anything they wished according to the limits of individual talent and toil, and in reaching their fullest potential would raise humanity closer to its ideal. Medicine had not been an obvious choice for a young woman who equated illness with weakness, cared little for anyone beyond the circle of her 8 siblings, and preferred the life of the mind to the functions of the body, which she found, quite frankly, disgusting. But God had chosen her, she believed, to pursue this arduous path, and she had chosen Emily, her most capable sister, 5 years younger, to follow her. In the decades to come, Elizabeth would make greater use of her pen than her medical instruments, her opinionated eloquence preserved in reams of her own writing, both private and published. It was plain-spoken, understated Emily who quietly embraced the challenge of medicine itself, Emily who would spend her life as a practicing physician, surgeon, and instructor, though, like her sister, she too fell short of empathy. There is certainly nothing attractive in the care of miserable, forlorn, sick people, she wrote to Elizabeth. It is only as scientific illustration that I can take the least interest in them, unless it were possible to raise them, and that is a difficult matter. Raising the expectations and ambitions of women from the slums of 5 Points to the salons of Fifth Avenue, a difficult matter indeed. Together the Blackwell sisters managed it. Their story does not fit on a plaque. Chapter 1. Bristol, New York, Cincinnati. The yellowed notebook is inscribed with perfectly straight lines of Elizabeth Blackwell's careful 11-year-old penmanship. There lived, as my story says, a lady and gentleman. It begins. The gentleman, a manufacturer like Elizabeth's father, watches his friends emigrate from England to America. And as he knew that his business was a very good one, and that he could bring up his children better there than in England, he asked his wife what she thought about going, though she was sorry to leave her native land, yet as she knew that it was for her children's good she consented. They would embark in the best vessel in the port, in a cabin just like a parlor, furnished with a carpet, a sofa, some chairs, a piano, a bookcase with several interesting books in, and a number of beautiful plants on the window seat. Music, books, nature, and nice furniture. Everything anyone could want in a safe, cozy space. It is the vision of a child trying to tame her fears. In August 1832, the Blackwell family left their native Bristol forever. The party of 15, Samuel and Hannah, their 8 children, a governess, 2 maids, and 2 aunts, boarded the Cosmo for 7 weeks and 4 days of malodorous misery. Cholera, a plague that had reached England for the first time the previous year, stowed away with the steerage passengers, several of whom died en route. It was a terrifying passage from the predictable comforts of home toward an unimaginable future. Then again, home had recently become less comfortable or predictable. A decade earlier, Samuel Blackwell, son of a Bristol cabinet maker, had claimed his place in the industrial middle class and established his family in a terraced house at the corner of Wilson Street and Lemon Lane. An ambitious young sugar refiner, he dressed in ministerial black, with a snowy white cravat, though his wife Hannah was known to indulge her frivolous side. She loved dancing and cherished her China tea service. The family was growing rapidly. First, Anna and Marion, and then Elizabeth, her birth in 1821 bracketed by the deaths of 2 infant brothers, both named Samuel. After this came a third healthy Samuel, followed quickly by Henry. Soon there would be Emily and Ellen, then Howard and George. The 9 Blackwell children thought of themselves in alternating pairs of girls and boys, with Elizabeth the odd one out. Her nickname was Little Shy. Hannah Lane Blackwell found her calling in motherhood. Her own childhood was not a time she liked to dwell upon. I was fitted with the dress of black in expectation of my father being hanged, she remembered. She was a little girl when her father was arrested, along with a female accomplice, not his wife, for forgery, his clock-making business apparently not as profitable as he desired. His protestations of innocence during his trial were undermined by the fact that he had tried to eat his counterfeit banknotes when challenged. Escaping execution, he was transported to Australia, and Hannah never saw her father again. She found a husband whose probity, if perhaps not his business acumen, would never be called into question, and devoted herself to managing a stable and upright household. Samuel and Hannah were idealists as well as capitalists, Protestant dissenters from the established Church of England, advocates of education, temperance, hard work, and self-improvement. Staunch Whig reformers and early anti-slavery activists. Wait. A sugar refiner opposed to slavery? British trade in humans might have ceased in 1807, but on the sugar plantations of the Caribbean, the English still depended on enslaved labor. Samuel dealt in a commodity tied to an institution he abhorred, and he dreamed of finding a way to produce sugar without cruelty. Congregationalists in an Anglican society, anti-slavery activists in the sugar trade, the Blackwells held deeply moral, defiantly unorthodox opinions. In this generation, and more so in the next, they practiced an ideological contrarianism, striving toward a moral high ground that the placid mainstream ignored, dismissed, or failed to imagine. From those isolated and inhospitable heights, they aspired to shine as beacons, guiding the unenlightened toward a truer future. Firstborn Anna, dictatorial and dramatic, persuaded her mother to let her sleep in the garret and invested her pocket money in a spyglass. When she felt generous, she invited Marion and Elizabeth, Emily was too little, to climb out her dormer window onto the leads of the roof. Snug in their sky parlor, the 3 girls majestically surveyed the hills and fields beyond the eastern edge of the city, until someone caught them at it. Unabashed, these daughters of progressive reformers did what they had seen the grown-ups do. They wrote a petition, promising to sit perfectly still and not lean over the parapet, and delivered it to their father. Samuel, in turn, responded with another Blackwell pastime. He wrote a poem, which began, Anna, Bessie, and Polly. Polly was Marian's nickname. Your request is mere folly. The leads are too high for those who can't fly. After that, the girls had to content themselves with the wooden rocking horse in the back parlor, Anna in the saddle, Marian perched on the rockers behind, and Elizabeth in front. All but the youngest of the Blackwells were born in Bristol and grew strong on a diet of nature, literature, and political consciousness. Favorite excursions included the double springs of Mother Pugsley's well at Kingsdown, or the craggy grandeur of St. Vincent's Rocks, tumbling down to the River Avon, the cliff ledges home to plants found nowhere else, whitebeam, speedwell, rock cress. Samuel and Hannah granted their daughters the same access to knowledge as their sons. Their books were mostly of the pious and improving sort. Mrs. Sherwood's Stories Explanatory of the Church Catechism was a perennial, until Anna and Marian, with the help of a nursemaid, got hold of a few volumes of Sir Walter Scott. There was a dreadful scene, and our beloved novels were seized and carried off to Papa, and we expected some dreadful punishment, Anna remembered. But Samuel, curious to see what had captivated his daughters, sat down to read Scott, and was captivated in turn. Hannah was the less flexible parent. Her faith abjured vanity. As one admired for her beauty, she struggled with it herself, and she was determined to prevent it from taking root in impressionable minds. The pretty baby makes the ugliest person, she insisted. Her vigilance had the contrary effect of making her children morbidly self-conscious, and their awkwardness only grew with time. We were always so shabbily dressed that we were always painfully conscious of not looking like other people, Anna remembered. But with so many siblings, there was never a shortage of companionship at home. They turned toward one another and held themselves apart. Like many dissenters, intellectually adventurous, politically engaged, Samuel and Hannah prized the moral over the material, shuddering at the lavish pageantry of the Anglican establishment, even as it persisted in excluding them. Until 1828, dissenters were barred from public office. Their sons, however brilliant, were not permitted to take degrees at Oxford or Cambridge until the 1850s. The Blackwell children were acutely aware of the contrast between the principled austerity at home and the glittering delights of bustling Bristol. Though Hannah's marriage was happy, her daughters could not help noticing that the extended family was full of less contented women. 4 poor, starveling aunts lived under their brother Samuel's roof. Mary was the favorite, a natural lady. Lucy, very small, kindly, and null, served as seamstress, though she had not an atom of taste and knew no more of dressmaking than of Greek. Anne, in her namesake niece Anna's unsparing estimation, was very well-meaning, obstinate, ignorant, and ugly. Barbara was the least popular of all, especially once installed as governess in Wilson Street. Anna called her one of the most disagreeable, ill-tempered, strict, narrow-minded creatures alive. Yet the girls understood that what their aunts lacked was not intelligence, but opportunity. Hateful Aunt Barbara was very clever, and education might have had its full course of usefulness in her case, Anna mused, but she straggled up, like the rest of her family, ignorant as a broomstick. Uneducated and unpartnered, the aunts had no choice but to fill whatever roles were available in their brother's household. Marriage, however, was no guarantee of anything better. Grandmother Blackwell, tiny and gentle, lived in the shadow of her tyrannical husband, a man so unpleasant his family must occasionally have wished it were he, and not Hannah's father, who had been transported to Australia. Anna could not remember Grandmother Blackwell putting forth an opinion on any subject beyond housework and meals. But before her death, she startled her eldest granddaughter, warning her how careful girls ought to be before they listen to the flatteries of a man, seeing that all that ceased when they'd got a woman to marry them, and then the poor girl found what a dreadful master marriage had given her, what a slave she was, and what a world of care and labor and worry she had got into, adding that those were wise who did not marry, and that if it were to do over again, most certainly she would not marry Grandpapa. None of the 5 Blackwell girls would marry. All of them, at various times, would earn a living as teachers. In the Blackwell household, the terms master and slave were not used lightly. In 1823, the abolitionist Thomas Clarkson stopped to speak in Bristol, a port at the center of Britain's sugar trade, carrying with him a polished wooden chest from which he produced a display of the arts and produce of African peoples. Inspired, Samuel Blackwell joined Bristol's Auxiliary Anti-Slavery Society and studied the tantalizing promise of sugar beets, which could be farmed in temperate climates without slave labor, an innovation in which the French had recently invested, their access to Caribbean cane sugar blocked by the embargoes of the Napoleonic Wars. Samuel did not preoccupy himself with bettering the lives of plantation slaves. His focus had more to do with the moral hygiene of British sugar consumers. But his beliefs and his livelihood were still essentially opposed. His offspring took note. We children had been so harrowed by the statements about West Indian slavery, Anna remembered, that we had given up taking sugar in our tea, by way of protest. Then again, the unsweetened tea had been paid for by sugar. Sugar refining might have boosted Samuel Blackwell's status, but it was a tricky foundation on which to build. In 1828, the whole household watched the great feathers of flame and the volumes of sparks rushing up into the sky from across the narrow river Avon as Samuel's counterslip refinery burned. Even from that safe distance, the railings they leaned upon at the river's edge grew warm from the conflagration. Refineries received raw sugar from the Caribbean and then boiled, filtered, granulated, and finally molded and trimmed it into smooth conical loaves. The combination of roaring boilers and combustible sugar dust meant that refineries had an alarming tendency to explode. Samuel was able to rebuild his business, but he had to downsize from airy Wilson Street to grittier lodgings attached to his new refinery. Other disappointments followed. Samuel's brother James, in charge of the Blackwell interests in Dublin, succumbed to violent paranoia and ran the office into the ground. He was eventually committed to a private asylum, where he felt less threatened by the assassins he believed were trying to kill him. A Bristol shipping firm that owed Samuel thousands of pounds went bankrupt, and in addition to these financial tremors, a larger political quake shook Bristol in the fall of 1831. Decades later, the Blackwell siblings could still recall the eerie silence of the deserted streets, followed by the roaring tumult of hundreds of angry men pelting past with torches to attack Bristol's seats of power. The rapid rise of industrial cities had made Britain's electoral landscape obsolete, with minimally populated and easily manipulated rural rotten bureaus, sending members to the House of Commons, while the surging populations of urban areas went unrepresented. Not that workers could vote anyway, as the franchise was limited to landowners. In October, after the Second Reform Bill was defeated, the city was convulsed by 3 days of deadly riots. Though the Blackwells were heartily in favor of legislative reform, the violence unleashed around them was terrifying. At this vulnerable moment, Samuel was unusually susceptible to the glowing reports he had begun to receive from friends who had emigrated to America. It was a nation founded by dissenters, after all, where the Blackwells' religion would not obstruct their children's prospects. Samuel could bring his anti-slavery energy to a nation soaked in the blood of slaves, and in the vastness of American agricultural possibility, perhaps he could find a way to root his sugar beets in the same soil. His decision to emigrate was met with horror by his colleagues in Bristol, who offered him a generous loan in an attempt to persuade him to stay. Hannah shared their dismay. She had just given birth to Howard, her 8th living child, and she was already pregnant again. New York, when the Blackwells disembarked from the Cosmo at last, was oddly quiet. They soon discovered that the scourge they hoped to leave behind had leaped ahead of them. The city was in the grip of its first cholera epidemic, and its wealthier residents had fled. An understanding of the mechanisms by which epidemics spread was still decades away. The death toll exceeded 3,500 out of a population of 250,000. For all Samuel's optimism, America was a perilous land where manners were rougher and rules less defined. Would his children and his fortunes flourish in this place full of active dollar-getting people, hustling along filthy streets where plain wooden buildings were only just being replaced with more substantial brick and stone? His wife and children would never match his zest for the new world. He settled his family in rented accommodations on Thompson Street, and within a few weeks Hannah delivered a healthy boy, her 9th and last child. In honor of their brave beginning, they christened him George Washington Blackwell. There was a contingent quality to the Blackwell sojourn in New York. With the help of backers in Bristol, Samuel bought the Congress sugar refinery on Duane Street, one of the largest in the city. Within 2 years, the family moved from Manhattan to Long Island, near the village of Flushing, but their enjoyment of a spacious frame house and adjoining orchard was cut short when Samuel was stricken with malaria. The blame was placed correctly on their proximity to marshland, though it would be more than half a century before the mosquito was identified as the true culprit. As its name proclaimed, malaria, bad air, was thought to be caused by the noxious exhalations of stagnant bogs. Malaria was so common in the young United States that illness and recovery were known as seasoning, a normal part of settling in. In December 1835, the Blackwells skipped back across Manhattan to Jersey City, a ferry ride across the Hudson River from Samuel's refinery. There was a reason for every relocation, but the family's failure to settle in one place prevented deeper engagement with any community beyond their own clan. Elizabeth preferred solitude to socializing anyway. Her voracious reading juxtaposed Shakespeare and Pilgrim's Progress with the independent heroines of novels by Maria Edgeworth and Madame de Staël. Books were a refuge from her own ineptitude in company. "If people will make me out such a queer thing, they are very welcome," she declared, "and I shall take the liberty of caring very little about it." The cultivation of frivolous feminine charm was beneath her, and though she often found herself on the edge of things, she doubted the center was any better. "How gay the ladies look," she wrote of the passing crowd, "and how miserably their waists are pinched up." As a teenager, she hungered for recognition and despaired of achieving it. "I fear the brilliant radiance of genius is far from illuminating my soul," she confided to her journal. When her younger brother Sam escorted her to the commencement speeches at Columbia College, she was both inspired and frustrated. The Greek oration called up a multitude of thoughts.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?